Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Salebox for the 20th of July 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit, rounding up today's Steam deals. Now, according to the website, these deals will only last for 24 hours as opposed to the usual 48. Now, whether or not that's true, I don't know. They're claiming that the Steam sale goes on till July the 22nd. I'm not entirely sure what they intend to pull on the last couple of days, so just bear that in mind. Usually you can wait. At this point, you probably can't. So pick them up today, otherwise you might end up missing out. You can still grab yesterday's deals, and if you want to get some information on that, check out yesterday's sale box. As usual, the Australian prices won't be listed unless they differ from the US prices. So let's kick it off, shall we, with Prison Architect, 34% off. That is $19.79, €17.15, €13.85 in Tier 2. And the UK price is £13.19. So this is currently not done. This is not a finished product right now. It is in early access. There's a lot of stuff in the early access. A huge amount of it, in fact. The game is getting to the point where it's pretty much ready. But please bear in mind you are not buying a finished game here. It is on the early access program. So, what is it? Well, it's a prison management sim. It is a pretty good one as well, I have to say, by Introversion that brought you Darwinia, as well as the rather excellent Defcon and the rather great Uplink that came out a long time ago. It's a really solid product, honestly. It's got a nice, clean graphic style. It actually has a little bit of interesting morality in it as well, which I didn't really expect. The first tutorial mission has you building the necessary features to execute a man, all the while watching him sort of repent for his sins and things like that, which is a little bit crazy. There is an awful lot of really nice management stuff going on with this. There is a lot of detail, a lot of things you can actually do, and a good layer of complexity, but it's also not to the point where you're going to be utterly confused. The tutorial does a really nice job of actually telling you what you're supposed to be doing. So, it's not available yet, so I always put my usual caveat in. It's like, look, you are buying, quite obviously, an alpha, yeah? It's a very in-depth alpha, and it's an alpha that's had a lot of updates, but you're still buying an alpha, so bear that one in mind. Alright, let's move on to Starforge. That's also an alpha, 50% off. That takes it down to $10, €9.49, £7.49. So this is a sandbox game whereby you are supposed to survive on an alien planet that is rather hostile. This is very much in alpha. Version 0.46 is the latest build here. It is nowhere near complete. Nowhere near. It's not even in beta. So honestly, even though you're going to hopefully save an awful lot of money on this thing by picking up an alpha and not having to pay anywhere near as much as you would for the final product, you are still risking a lot on something that is by no means a finished game. Potentially, this game is going to be incredible, and you can build all sorts of great structures. It's really high fidelity. You can defend yourself against waves of enemy creatures and hostile flora and fauna, and you can go into space and nonsense like that, but it ain't anywhere near done. So I can't really in all good conscience recommend this. This is nowhere near as far along as Prison Architect is. I mean, that's actually a game. This is barely one at the moment, and is adding numerous different features in, but it's still far away from being a finished product. Assassin's Creed 3, 40% off. That takes it down to $24, €17.99, £12 and $23.97. You save a grand total of 2 cents in Australia. Congratulations, guys. So this pretty much covers all of the Assassin's Creed series, as you might imagine. Most of those are discounted. The pack, which comes with AC1, 2, Brotherhood, and Revelations, as well as some pointless map pack DLC for the multiplayer, is 66% off. And you can also pick up the rest of the games, as you might imagine, discounted. Okay, so AC3 is not as enjoyable, I would say, as stuff like Assassin's Creed 2 or even Brotherhood. Brotherhood's probably the one that I would pick up, actually, because it's a ridiculous discount. It's $5 or your regional equivalent for that, and the single player for Brotherhood is really good. Revelations is also discounted. That's not too shabby either. Admittedly, I would be looking towards Assassin's Creed 2 if you have no experience with the series, because that is really good. You don't need to have played the first one to actually enjoy the second one. It's an entirely different character. Assassin's Creed 2 is great. Brotherhood's great. Revelations is pretty good. Admittedly, it's kind of getting the same tired formula. And then 3, well, it didn't improve enough, in my opinion, on the original titles to actually be a hard recommendation. It's not bad. It's a pretty decent game, but the problem with that series, I think, is that it's kind of dragging on at this point. It doesn't really evolve on the previous titles all that much. It still doesn't do the whole assassination thing very well. It still doesn't do the whole stealth thing very well either. You are basically a mass murderer. The games are, more often than not, far too easy as well. And Assassin's Creed 3 does have some city play in it, but it's also got an awful lot of stuff out on the frontier, which in my opinion is less interesting than the stuff in the really large cities like Rome. So Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood, definite. Revelations is pretty good. And 3, maybe not for that price. Maybe just wait for it to go a little bit further down unless you're absolutely desperate to play Assassin's Creed 3 and have played all of the others. CSGO, 66% off, takes down to $5.09, €4.75, and that's $3.73 in Tier 2, and £4.07. Really, really solid tactical multiplayer competitive shooter as far as I'm concerned. Very, very good indeed. The thing I like about CSGO is that it also has a number of modes for those who don't want to play the straight-up competitive hardcore mode. Gun game is extremely enjoyable in that game. The Arsenal mode is really good as well. It's kind of a cut down and simplified version of the usual demolition mode with some smaller maps and the ability to unlock a different weapon every time you get a kill, which is pretty good. Personally, I like CSGO an awful lot, and I think it's really, really solid, and I would suggest to people that you should try that one out. It's got a bunch more weapons than the original, a lot more maps than the original, and it doesn't have the terrible hitboxes of CS Source, which is always nice. The competitive scene seems to be in two minds about Global Offensive right now, but since you're not part of that, you shouldn't actually give a crap. It's a very enjoyable game to play, and it's also one of the few modern shooters right now that doesn't have a crappy progression system in it, so I would strongly consider it. Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, 75% off, which takes it down to Omerta, City of Gangsters, 75% off. That takes it down to $10, €11.24 for some reason, and £7.49. Alright, so for this price, this one might not be too bad. I did a fairly in-depth video on this a little while ago. The problem that Omerta has, which is quite similar to games like Republic the Revolution, is that the actual strategy element in the city barely exists. It doesn't really make much of a difference what you do in the city side of things. The part of the game that actually has some meaning to it is the tactical combat, which is actually surprisingly good. It's a pretty solid XCOM-like turn-based tactical combat system that is fairly enjoyable to use and has a good variety of different weapons, all with different attacks. The problem with the main overworld is that it looks great, but it's not alive, really, in any sense of the word. There really is no reason for that overworld to be there. It might as well just be a set of menus, because nothing really happens in the overworld. You get to watch the results of certain actions that you take, but you can't really do anything in the overworld itself. The only thing you can really do is on the battlefields when you go into the tactical combat system. If you are looking for a gangster movie, though, at this price, it's not that bad. And that's mostly because it's carried by the theme, it's got a great soundtrack to go along with it, and the combat is pretty good. But if you're looking for a strategy game, if you're looking especially for a real-time strategy, you're not going to find it here whatsoever. So a little bit of a guarded warning on that one as far as I'm concerned. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, 66% off. That takes it down to $3.39, €3.39, and £2.37. Okay. This is, in my opinion, better than the original. A lot of people are going to disagree with me on this one. Admittedly, I think the reason they disagree is because it was a buggy piece of crap when it came out, and because the ending was cut, so it doesn't really... It's not that it doesn't make a lot of sense, it's just the ending to the game is absolutely dreadful. Basically, as Obsidian has a tendency to do, they keep getting rushed and ended up having to release an unfinished product. The original is also the same price as this, so some people will tell you that the original's better since it is a BioWare title. I think that Obsidian's game is better because it has a better storyline and more interesting characterization. I feel that the morality system of the original game, like a lot of BioWare stuff, is very black and white, and the characterization is very one-dimensional, let's just say, on a lot of that stuff. But a lot of people will disagree with me on that one. I would recommend grabbing the restoration mod for Knights of the Old Republic 2. The reason I say that is because it does fix a lot of the problems that it had. It brings a lot of that content back, and it makes it a more complete and rounded experience. Both of these games are showing their age, certainly. They don't really look all that great anymore. As usual with older titles like this, I would strongly recommend that you head on over to PCGamingWiki.com, particularly to try and get the widescreen fixes. Just bear in mind that if you do that, it will break the minimap, which is not that ideal and will require an additional fix. Yeah, older games are surprisingly annoying to get running on modern systems, but if you can soldier through it, it's well worth it in my opinion. It's a really solid, character-driven RPG experience. Worms Revolution, 75% off, takes it down to $3.74, €3.49 in Tier 1, and $2.74 in Tier 2. That is £3. Well, of the recent Worms titles, this one's one of the better ones. Lately, there have been a number of attempts to reboot Worms, as it were, that didn't really work out all that well. Revolution brings some new ideas to the table, but is, for the most part, quite solid. It has some nice character customization. Also has a class system, which is a little bit odd, although you can play a classic mode where that isn't a factor. The levels are quite nice, and it comes with a level editor as well. I think most hardcore Worms players complain every time there's a new Worms game because it screws up the ninja rope, and I don't disagree. I mean, it's been a while since the ninja rope has performed the way it's supposed to, but I actually had a decent amount of fun with this, and for this price tag, it's probably worth a try. There's also a 4-pack, of course, if you wish, and the DLC Season Pass is 75% off, so you can grab all of the stuff, which contains a lot of new campaign missions and tile sets and things like that. It doesn't really have a lot of new weapons, though, so unless for some reason you want to play the single-player missions, I actually wouldn't bother with that one. Natural Selection 2, 75% off. That takes it down to $6.24, €5.74, £4.74. Is this still an active game? A lot of people keep asking me. It is, yes. It's not as active as it was, but it's still active enough. Today, for instance, it had 1,861 concurrent players, which is a pretty damn good number, and it tends to hover around the low end of the top 100 on Steam, which means there's more than enough players for you to actually get into games. What is it all about? Well, it is a first-person shooter for the most part, but it also has a strategy element in it, in the fact that one player is the commander, who is able to build stuff on the map and order all of the other players around through a real-time strategy kind of view. And he also builds upgrades and various different things that the players can use in order to beat the enemy, and you have to essentially push your way across the map and eventually destroy all of the opposing team's buildings. It also happens to be aliens versus humans, which is a rather interesting asymmetrical piece of warfare. A lot of interesting stuff you can do there. Is really great. Like, I gotta say, it's an incredibly enjoyable experience. The only issue you're probably gonna have is if you get in a server originally that doesn't have a good commander that's willing to explain how the game works to you, because frankly, that game does have something of a high learning curve. Please don't try and be a commander from the start. You will absolutely wreck your team, and that in itself is something of a problem, quite frankly, because there is that potential to happen. A commander can completely destroy the game for the rest of the team. But if you learn how to play it, watch a few tutorial videos, get an idea, then I think the game is going to be highly rewarding for you. It's a very unique experience. It's not the first game to have done it, but it is one of the better ones. So I would certainly recommend Natural Selection 2 for something a little bit different. Takes us to our deal of the day, which is Saints Row 3, 75% off, $5, €5 and £5 for that one. Not really sure why the prices are equal across the board, but for the Americans, it's a fantastic deal. Saints Row 3 is in the vein of Grand Theft Auto in terms of its open world, but cranked all the way up to 14. I'm not even going to say 11 at this point. It's very, very silly indeed. It's set in the near future, and for the most part, it's a game about causing absolute goddamn havoc, and it does that in a fine style indeed. It's a very enjoyable romp. I wouldn't take the storyline too seriously, but it has some fun characters and voice acting in it. The DLC is also 75% off. You can buy the whole thing by the name of the full package, which comes with a bunch of different weapon packs. There's like 20 pieces of DLC for this, but the vast majority of them were tiny little outfit packs and things like that. The real DLC for it is Gangsters in Space, Trouble with Clones, and Genki Bowl 7. That's the actual story DLC. But yeah, I'd get the full package. It comes with a whole bunch of different interesting items and weapons and outfits and and things like that, so you don't really pay all that much more for it. It does also have co-op, which is very enjoyable indeed. I mean, overall, it is a crass, very crude, and thoroughly enjoyable chaotic slaughterfest, and I would strongly suggest that you grab it if that's the kind of thing that you're into. Saints Row 4, of course, is heading our way, I believe, in late August. Okay, folks, that is me wrapped up for the day. Thank you very much for watching the Salebox, and I will see you next time.